socks.
Except more public. So, this is the Ancient and Medieval History Lecture for Wednesday. Cinco de Mayo! The 5th of May. And since I'm not Mexican, I don't really know what that means, except that I think it's Mexican Independence Day. Somebody made a horrible Star Wars pun, but I don't remember what it is. The Revenge of the Fifth. Yeah.
I thought it was changed to Revenge of the Sixth.
It doesn't matter. It's still like nails driven into a chalkboard and then scratched, which you've never heard.
What about
You've probably never seen a chalkboard. What? What? I'm curious. Once you're done chewing your thing, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
I don't know what you're saying.
Shibladnik. Nook. Big logo.
Wait, what about May the 4th be with you? Why is that?
Don't ask. Look, this is the first year I even recognized that. So, the island of England, as opposed to the island of Ireland, is divided 3 ways. In the far west, Cornwall is ultimately conquered by the Anglo-Saxons. So is Strathclyde. But Wales is not. So Wales remains Celtic. Then you got in the center of the island, the Anglo-Saxons, particularly the kingdom of Wessex. In the north, you've got more Celts, Scots, and in the east, the Danes come. And they conquer the Northumbrians, the Mercians, the Sussexites, and the East Essexites, leaving only Wessex. The Danes are the Vikings. So, Britain divided in 3, depending upon the year. The Anglo-Saxons are farther east or farther west, depending upon the year. The Celts have more territory or less territory. This is because, just as the Anglo-Saxons did when they conquered the Britons in the early 500s, when the Vikings come to England, they come primarily from Denmark. The Norwegians go to Ireland and Scotland, Iceland, Greenland, and ultimately Vinland. The Swedes tend to go into Russia, down to Constantinople and beyond. But the Danes, they go to England. Now, at first, they're raiders. They come, they do their crimes, they leave with treasure, and they go back home again. But after a while, they say, why are we going back home? We're the second sons. We're the third sons, fourth, fifth, and sixth sons. We're not going to make anything. There's no more land back home. Even if we have more money, we're still not going to get a good value for it. Why don't we stay here? This way we can conquer our land rather than buy it. We'll pay the iron price for it, not the gold price. And we'll be the leaders of this land because we will have conquered. So the raiders who come and go become invaders who come and stay. Now, at first, these invaders are all about conquering, taking territory. And again, the Danes succeed in taking territory in the east of England, what is called at that time the Danelaw. And the Danelaw is where the Danes' laws hold, sway. But after conquering the Danelaw, most of the Danes, not all, settle down. People who settle down are called settlers, as they settle down. And the difference between an invader and a settler is an invader spends most of his time wandering around, killing people, and taking what they have. A settler spends most of his time farming his own land. Now, there was a period of mixed, where Danish settlers would still gather in armies and go fight and try to make the Danelaw bigger. But most of their time, instead of being devoted to conquest, is devoted to living life, being a farmer, farming your own land, growing your own food, having kids, doing all the things necessary to have kids, all that stuff. Life as a free man in a new country. Because this group ended up winning a lot of the wars, many of them became rulers, local community leaders. Not all. Some of the Danes came in and they basically were followers, but they had their own land now. They had more wealth than they did. But some of the Danes became local leaders and some became national leaders.
I kind of have a question about the Vikings.
Just a little louder, please. Question about the Vikings.
Vikings.
Sure.
Do you kind of know how the most Scandinavian countries, like, there's like a small country and populous countries in the world, how did that happen?
Christianity. The short answer is Christianity. I'll give you a longer answer too because it deserves it. When the Scandinavian lands become Christian, a lot of their wartime spirit is shifted into peaceful endeavors, like farming. And the Swedes and the Norwegians in particular, and the Danes to an extent, basically go about living their lives. Now, there are a couple of conqueror kings in the next 1,000 years. In the 1600s, there's a king named Gustavus Adolphus, who's Swedish, and who tries conquering Germany and even marches deep into Russia. But that's the exception. For the most part, instead of devoting themselves to war, they're left alone to build a nicer life for themselves. And this builds a society that's community-oriented, that's cooperative rather than conflict-oriented. Now, they can do this for a couple of reasons. The main reason is everyone else in the area remembers the Vikings. And they want to leave the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Danes alone because they don't want the warlike spirit to come back. Sweden and Norway would be hard to conquer because they're mountainous and the people are huge. And if they get angry, they're very dangerous. So they're left alone. If they weren't so scary and their land wasn't so rough, they probably would not have been left alone. That's a good question. Now, after World War II, a lot of credit is given to these countries for being socialist and happy. They're not socialist. Both Sweden and Norway are free market economies that have very high taxes and very high regulation. But you still have corporations like Saab and Volvo, and people are still allowed to own businesses. It's just taxes, people pay 80 to 90% of what they earn in taxes. Americans pay between 40 and 60%, depending upon who you are. So much higher taxes. The government also regulates how you do your business much more. And with that extra money, what they do is they provide a universal basic standard of living. So that in these countries, everyone, even if your parents are complete basket cases, has access to education. Well, so do we. Has access to medical care. Well, sort of we do. Has access to college. That depends. But they are also remarkably homogeneous. Until the last 10 years. Up until the last 10 years, the Norwegians and the Swedes had almost no experience with immigrants. However, within the last 10 years, both countries have taken massive numbers of Muslims from the Middle East, and they're not fitting in well. It's causing some problems that the Scandinavians haven't had to deal with in living memory. And right now, nobody knows how things are going to turn out. But good question. So, with the Danelaw, eventually people get comfortable with it. Okay, you're here. Your grandfather came, he was a real scary guy. Your father came, he was still rough to deal with. But you know what? You and I, we grew up together. I'm Anglo-Saxon, you're Danish. We both live together. We both farm in the same way. When we fight, we put a broadsword in our hand and a round shield in our other hand. And we go fight in a shield wall. We're basically, we speak a different varieties of German. Actually, our German is becoming more and more similar. Your Danish is becoming more English. My English is becoming more Danish. So the Danes were neighbors at the end. They were basically assimilated into the Anglo-Saxon population. So that's an interesting transition. Now, there is a different way that Vikings are accepted, and this happens with a guy named Rollo in a place called Normandy. Normandy is here. On this map, it is here. Paris gets raided by Vikings, burned. And the king of the Franks, the king of France, doesn't want this to continue. How are you going to get rid of the Vikings? The problem is, on their longships, they strike where they will. You could have hundreds of ships over the horizon that you don't know about, and suddenly they're all over you. Nobody thought Paris was at risk. It was too big. It was too well defended. And yet the Vikings came in and they sacked it. If Paris can be taken, any city in France can be taken. There's no time to organize an army. Travel by land is so much slower than travel by sea. So once Paris was hit, the French king finds a Viking chieftain named Rollo and proposes a deal. Rollo will bring his people, and he will be given by the king of France this region, which is a beautiful region of France. And since the Northmen are settling there, this area will be called Normandy. Because in French, Northman, Norman. Normandy is a dukedom under the French king. Rollo will be Christian. That's the deal. Rollo will be Christian. His people will become Christians. Rollo will kneel before the French king. Kneel. The French king will have a sword out and will dub Rollo a knight and a duke of the French realm. Rollo will become a senior French nobleman. His people will be allowed to take and do whatever they want with this land in the name of the French king, with this caveat. Rollo will make sure that no other Vikings attack France. Rollo will deal with any Vikings that attack France. It's like inoculating your body. The French kingdom takes in Rollo and his Normans, gives them one of the most beautiful places in the country in return for protection. So now these Norman Vikings are going to be the protectors of France against the other Vikings, and it works. But what happens in Normandy is like a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's like an alloy of copper and tin, which makes bronze. It's a hybrid, like Africanized killer bees. Because you have men of Viking size in the Normans, big hulking dudes and ladies. And you have men of Viking spirit among the Normans. Killing and fighting is fun. But they're beginning to be moderated by Christianity, stripped of some of their wildness, and they're beginning to get equipped by the most advanced armorers in Christendom. So these Normans are going to learn French ways of fighting. They're going to have French equipment, which is better than Viking equipment at this time. They're going to get the best of the French world and the best of the Viking world. And they're going to become stronger than both. What Rollo seeds in Normandy, what the King of France seeds in Normandy, will a century later sprout fruit that will conquer England and Sicily and a bunch of other places around the European world. Frenchified Vikings. Who would have thought Frenchified Vikings would be the toughest people of all during this time in this part of the world? So, from raiders to neighbors. Now, this should be 1 and this should be 2. Gosh, I'm silly. Okay. So now we go to the kingdom of Wessex, which is the only Anglo-Saxon kingdom left after the Danelaw is established. And the new king of Wessex is Alfred. Alfred. Alfred faces a Danish army under a guy named Halfdane. Halfdane is still an invader. And his goal is to conquer the last of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the kingdom of Wessex. Halfdane's army is bigger than Alfred's. It's more fearsome than Alfred's. It's more warlike than Alfred's. Early in his reign, Alfred fights a great battle with Halfdane and his army and loses. Alfred retreats to a swamp called Athelney. Athelney is spelled Athelney. Athelney. Alfred and a handful or two of survivors retreat into a swamp. As far as Halfdane is concerned, the war is over. Wessex becomes part of the Danelaw. Halfdane becomes its ruler. And if Alfred's smart, he's going to get the heck out of town. He'll sneak away, and nobody will ever hear from him again. This is the moment where Alfred earns his name. He is the only king or queen in British history to have the title the Great. He is Alfred the Great, King Alfred the Great, the great king of England in all history. Here's why. Anyone who was smart would understand that the war was lost. Here we are in this swamp. We've got nothing other than our lives. Some of us are dying of wounds, others are dying of the cold and damp. If we go outside the swamp, the Danes will hunt us down for sport. We've lost. Our kingdom's citizens, our neighbors and friends are under the Danish boot. They are paying the Danes' taxes incorporated into the Danish kingdom. I'll turn the heat, the air conditioning down a little bit. I suppose it is kind of cold in here. What a normal person would do in a situation like that is they would leave. They would maybe go to another country, try to drum up some support, raise an army, and reinvade if they were stubborn. Or they'd leave and go somewhere else. Alfred was a very religious fellow. He would have been welcome in Rome, even as a priest or a monk. But that isn't what Alfred does. Alfred lets it be known that he's going to fight a hopeless battle. By all logic, a completely and utterly hopeless battle. Alfred and his few men begin raiding outside the swamp. They begin capturing wet weapons, even a little bit of treasure from the Danes, who think the war is over. The army has dispersed. Alfred continues raiding. The Danes can't find him. They go into the swamp and either they disappear or they come out empty-handed. The people of England, of Wessex, begin to hope that if Alfred can't be defeated, maybe the war isn't actually lost. Maybe there's hope. And men with hope can fight. Eventually, Alfred is joined by enough Wessexmen so that he leaves the swamp. He defeats the remnant of Halfdane's army, drives them out of Wessex. Had Alfred accepted defeat, England would have passed into history. The Danes would have taken over, and there would have been a different culture. When Alfred regains Wessex, he does a few pretty important things. First of all, Alfred establishes the Fyrd. I'm writing it down for you to write down. The Fyrd, F-Y-R-D, is the militia. Every able-bodied man in his kingdom is a member of the Fyrd. It's like being a member of the local volunteer fire department. If you're a man, you train with the Fyrd frequently. You learn who your leaders are. You learn how to fight under them. You learn how to fight together. If there's a problem, the feared is called, the militia is called together, and the militia goes out and fights. Those Saxons that the Vikings met in that scene on the beach that we saw yesterday, they were the feared. And while they were afeared of the Vikings, in general terms, better to have men who can fight than no men who can fight, especially when dealing with Vikings. So Alfred establishes the feared. The second thing Alfred establishes are the beacons. After my lecture today, I plan on showing you a scene from The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, which is based on what Alfred sets up. I'll just tell you about it now. On prominent hilltops along the coast and inland, Alfred has watchtowers and fires set up. A fire supply ready to be doused in oil and lit. If there is a Viking longship or long ships sighted, you light your beacon fire. A nearby tower sees your beacon fire, they light theirs, and so on and so forth, up the line. And people record which beacon was first. So suddenly the kingdom is aroused, the feared mobilizes, and once they figure out where the first beacon was lit, they can send troops there and downwind. So the feared is set up to fight. The beacons are set up to coordinate the fight. But who's going to lead the fight? The leaders of the fight, in peace and in war, are the aldermen. Alderman comes from the Anglo-Saxon older man. Older man, alderman. Today, if you hear the title alderman, usually it's like a city leader, like a town councilman. Coeur d'Alene has a city council. In another type of city, like Chicago, they'd be called aldermen. Well, the aldermen of the Anglo-Saxons under King Arthur, they are the local leaders. They train the local feared. They make sure the beacon system is in order. They regularly report to the king what the deficiencies are in the local defense system so that it can be fixed. And what the strengths are in the local defense system so they can be utilized. By the way, Miss Daigle, if you're cold, you can wear your thing. I haven't asked people to take non-charter wear off. That's just if you're cold. I think you had mentioned being cold earlier. Let's see. So Alfred sets up all of these, but we're not done. Because Alfred builds Britain's or England's first navy. The Royal Navy, which is going to dominate the oceans of the world for hundreds of years, is established by King Alfred the Great. Why should we wait ashore for a bunch of sea raiders that have all the advantages because they travel at sea? Let's build our own warships. Let's staff them with marines and sailors so that we can go to sea and track them and go where they go and land where they land. The warships were not designed to fight a sea battle the way the Greek warships were or modern warships are. They were designed to track and land soldiers so the Vikings wouldn't be alone, so that the locals wouldn't be alone in facing them. The British Navy would come, Alfred's Navy, the English Navy, the Wessex Navy would come and land troops, and they would work with the locals against the Vikings. These all come together to work. And because of that, the last innovation that I'm going to tell you about of Alfred's can be written. It's called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. You should have all these written down. Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. ANGLO-SAXON Chronicle. ANGLO-SAXON. Chronicle. CHRONICLE. Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Alfred organizes a group of monks and scholars. And what these monks and scholars are going to do is they're going to report on the events that happen every year in the Kingdom of Wessex. Mira? Mira? We're going to find out what happened that was important. We're going to write it down. And in writing it down, we're going to remember. I'm bad with names right now. Rylan? Okay. By chronicling the events of every year, the Kingdom of Wessex will develop a pride in what it's gone through, and people will get to learn from history. It will also boost the local monks and scholars, giving them more money, which will help them to survive. In general terms, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle becomes the chief historical source that people use to this day. Okay, I'm confused now. Maddie, where are you? Yeah, I'm still confused by the masks. So, Alfred does all of these things. And what all of these things do is they begin to bring Wessex back. In fact, more than just bringing Wessex back, what happens is the Danes, far from obliterating and overwhelming the English, begin to emulate the English. Ava? Ultimately, the Danelaw and its cultures and customs is going to be absorbed into the Kingdom of Wessex, not the other way around. Oh, people of Danish heritage will certainly be leaders in the Kingdom of Wessex. Ultimately, Danish kings will even become kings of Wessex. But the culture of Anglo-Saxon England, which is more advanced than the culture of the Vikings, is going to win out. You know what? You know who else does this? Is what you think. China does this throughout its history, and it's brilliant. Again and again, China gets conquered. And when it gets conquered, the barbarians do what barbarians do for a while. But they never suffer a dark age, not from the ancient times, not up until the time of the communists. Because every time people who come into China as invaders, they like Chinese food. They like wearing silks. They like the amenities of civilization and culture that the Chinese have. Their children of invaders grow up loving the country they've conquered. And the grandchildren of the invaders are, in effect, Chinese, culturally. This is China's great way of dealing with invaders, and it works because they're more advanced than anyone around them. Everyone wants the lifestyle that China can give to its people because China is so advanced. Well, because Wessex is more advanced, and because they're living in peace side by side, the Vikings end up becoming Wessexmen. They end up becoming, in thought, word, and deed, Englishmen, men of Angloland. Had Alfred failed, that wouldn't have happened. And culture in England would have been destroyed, or at the very least, brought down to the level of Denmark. So, that's why he is the only king in English history called the Great. Bear this in mind, too. Did I give something wrong? Sorry. Ava, where are you? I'm sorry. Mask. I don't always notice. I see no questions about Alfred, so we will move on. Claudia. Motte and Bailey castles. Yes?
Oh, I was just like, you know how in Milan, like, they kind of have the similar system, like the Viking thing, like the beginning of Milan, when the Huns invade, they kind of have that system.
It's a good system. And a lot of people use it. I have only seen Mulan once, the cartoon version, so it's not what comes to mind. But yeah, there is. And yes, it's the same thing. And I do, when I'm done, intend to show you that scene from Lord of the Rings because I just think it's beautiful. Maybe I should look up the scene from Mulan as well. That might be enjoyable to see also. Mira? You, not Ava. And yes.
So I read for school a couple years ago.
Mhm.
I had to read like the Ballad of the White Horse. Isn't that about King Alfred?
I've never read it, so I don't know it.
I just remember like I had to memorize a piece of it, and like I just remember there's this funny poem. It was like the great gales of Ireland are the men that God made mad, for all their wars are merry and all their songs are sad. I think it kind of characterizes the Irish like really well.
If you want, send me the poem on email. I'd love to read it, and if I can, I'll award extra credit. That sounds fun. I'm not familiar with the poem, so thank you. And thank you in advance if you do email it to me. Okay. Again, yes.
Can I ask a question going back to the Viking?
Certainly.
I'm just really, how far did they go? Because you jumped around, and I was like, did they go? It's not like they went all the way around where they first were.
Are you talking in general or in England?
In general.
Okay. I'm going to go through a comprehensive list so that you know. Okay, and yes, I have been jumping. So, the Norwegians, they go to the Orkney Islands and the north of Scotland. They also go to Ireland, Ireland. The city of Dublin, capital of Ireland. If you speak Gaelish, but it's Dublin, was established by the Norwegian Vikings. The Norwegians go to Iceland. They go to Greenland. And they go to Vinland, which is in Newfoundland in North America. Vinland, V-I-N-L-A-N-D. Okay, the Danes go to the Danelaw in England and to Normandy. The Swedes, are you keeping up or do you want me to pause?
No, I'm keeping up.
Okay, that's great. The Swedes go to what will become the Kievan Rus, Russia. They also go to Constantinople and they raid the Mediterranean. Ultimately, the Normans, spoiler alert, who come from Normandy will conquer England and will rule Sicily as well. So I think that's a pretty comprehensive list. The Vikings raid far more broadly than that, but that's where they actually leave a real impact. Thank you. So, early medieval, is that a hand? No? Okay. Most people, when we think of castles, we think of big stone fortifications, like in Lord of the Rings. But that's not how castles start in the Dark Ages. Castles start with this. It's called a Motte and Bailey castle. A Motte and Bailey castle is this sort of weird wooden construction. So, what you have is a ditch. That's your motte. And the ditch might have water in it, it might have spikes in it. If there's an enemy coming, you might put tar in it in order to light it on fire. It's a barrier. It's designed to prevent people from running up to your walls and knocking them down. This ditch is going to stop them from doing that and slow them down. Your village is on this lower area here with just the motte protecting it. And what you've got for a wall is a stockade fence. A stockade fence is a bunch of logs with pointy tops jammed into the ground So you've got log next to 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 log. They're tied together. They're painted with tar, so they're not easy to climb. And if you get on top and you fall, you can get spliced on one. It's just not a happy. These walls sometimes, but didn't always, had little ledges on them that you could climb, and then you'd be on the inside of the wall near the top, and you could help keep people out by fighting them down. That was sometimes there. And there was a gatehouse tower. So you'd have the gate here, a little bridge crossing the Motte, and on top of the gate you'd have a platform, and guys would fight from that. There'd be another gate here on the other side of the lower area, and that is another gatehouse. Then you've got this mound. And this mound is constructed with all the dirt from the Motte, turned into a big hill, a steep, big hill that you seed with grass. And there's a stairway going up. And atop that is a narrow area with either a wooden or a stone tower. This, I always get the Motte and bailey confused. I'm pretty sure the Motte is the ditch, and the bailey may be either this wall fence or it's this hill. In any event, the Motte and bailey, this is the place you ultimately retreat to. This is where the Lord lives. This is where people fight from. If the village is taken, everyone runs up into this smaller area and crowds in, and people fight at the top of this steep hill. The enemy, to go up it, has to run along and then climb, climb, climb. Meanwhile, they're getting shot at from above. This tower is the last place of refuge. What any fortification is designed to do is to slow the enemy down and channel their attack into an area where you can kill the most of them as the defender. A fortification is supposed to allow a defender with fairly few men and resources to hold off a much more powerful field army. The Motte and bailey is not perfect, but it's a good system. And this is the kind of castle that people are building throughout the Dark Ages. Sometimes the tower in the area up here is stone. Sometimes it's just dense wood. Eventually, though, in the High Middle Ages, this will be replaced by the kind of stone castles that we know about. So, I think what we're going to do is leave things there. Please get the lights. And I will turn off the video. Probably I'll link the Lord of the Rings segment to you. So to those of you who are at home, watch the other videos. Thank you.